The trail vanished in less than a minute, one moment marked by white blazes, the next reduced to blank snow and moving shadow, the wind rising fast enough to steal direction, sound, and scale. Evan realizing too late that the map in his hands described a place that no longer existed. His boots sinking, his breath shortening, daylight slipping away faster than time should allow, and with every step the same hard truth tightening its grip, that no one knew where he was. No one would come looking tonight, and the mountains had already moved on without him. Evan Mercer was 36, an office planner from Indiana, alone on a winter stretch of the Appalachian Trail in early March of 1989, carrying a paper map worn thin at the folds, a compass clipped to his jacket, and a pack he had weighed carefully at home, believing preparation was something you finished before leaving. The day had started clear and manageable, cold but honest, until the ridge pulled in a low gray ceiling and the wind began cutting sideways through the trees, flattening distance and muting sound until the world felt smaller and less forgiving. The mistake came quietly, disguised as efficiency. He stepped off the main trail to get around a fallen tree, followed what looked like a narrow continuation pressed into fresh snow, and kept moving without stopping to confirm the blazes, trusting momentum, trusting that the trail would correct itself. But minutes passed without a marker. Then more, and when he finally stopped, the silence pressed in hard enough to feel physical, his breathing suddenly loud, his confidence thinning faster than the light. He unfolded the map with stiff fingers, the paper resisting like it had been stored in ice, the compass needle wavering before settling on a direction that clashed with his memory. Evan stood there too long, letting the stillness soak into him, aware that stopping felt good and dangerous at the same time, that comfort was already working against him. Snow falling steadily now, not dramatic, just persistent, filling his tracks almost as soon as they appeared, erasing proof that he had ever passed this way. He adjusted layers too late, sweat cooling under his jacket, chill creeping in where warmth had been, his gloves damp, fingers losing precision. He considered eating, then hesitated, already thinking in terms of later, of saving something for a moment he couldn't yet define. His watch read 3:42 p.m., sunset still hours off, but the light had flattened into something weak and colorless, offering visibility without warmth, promise without help. The realization that he no longer knew where the trail was arrived without panic, just a clean internal sentence that left no room for argument. I don't know where I am. He marked a rough guess on the map anyway, more to stay disciplined than because it meant anything, then chose a direction that angled downhill, because downhill suggested water and water suggested structure, something predictable in a landscape that was quickly becoming abstract. The slope steepened, trees thinning, wind sharpening. Evan slipped once and caught himself on a branch, noticing how delayed his reaction felt, as if his body were answering instructions through layers of resistance. He forced himself to eat half an energy bar, chewing slowly, jaw aching, aware that even small calories now carried weight. And as the forest darkened into real evening, he saw the outline of a shelter that didn't exist, a rectangle shaped by shadow, hope flaring hard and painful before dissolving back into trees, leaving him standing still, alone, understanding that night had already arrived ahead of schedule, and that from here on, survival would be decided in inches, minutes, and choices too small to feel important until they were irreversible. Evan forced himself to keep moving for another 10 minutes, not because it felt right, but because stopping too early felt like surrender, his headlamp still buried in the pack, daylight fading into a dull blue that flattened trees into walls, every step now a decision measured against breath and balance, the ground uneven beneath the snow, roots hidden like traps, rocks waiting to roll an ankle that could not afford to roll. He moved slower, deliberately, planting each foot before committing weight, aware that a fall here would cost heat, time, and confidence, all at once. The downhill angle sharpened, and with it came the sound he'd been hoping for and fearing at the same time. Water, faint but unmistakable, a stream cutting through the quiet. Evan followed it until the trees opened slightly, revealing a narrow ribbon of dark movement between snow-capped stones. He crouched, filled his bottle, hands shaking as the cold bit through wet gloves, and forced himself to drink slowly, not because he was thirsty, but because dehydration made cold sharper and mistakes easier. The stream gave him direction, but it also gave him a problem. Valleys collected wind, and wind stripped heat faster than effort could replace it. He scanned for a place to stop, not a camp, just a pause that made sense, something that broke wind, something that didn't sit at the bottom of a drainage where cold pooled like water. His eyes kept pulling tricks on him, depth misjudged, distances collapsing. Twice he thought he saw a clearing only to step forward and find it vanish. The headlamp came out finally, the cone of light narrow and harsh, stealing peripheral vision and replacing it with tunnel focus, the forest beyond it turning absolute black. Evan chose a cluster of young pines halfway up the slope, close enough together to slow wind, far enough from dead limbs to reduce risk. He stamped down snow with his boots, each movement heavy now, breath louder, slower to recover. He shrugged out of his pack and immediately felt the cold rush in, an animal response telling him to move, to keep producing heat. But he ignored it, forced himself to work methodically, ground insulation first, foam pad flattened over packed snow. Then the bivvy pulled free, fingers clumsy, zipper resisting, time stretching as fine motor skills slipped away. The shaking started as soon as he stopped moving in earnest. Not violent, just persistent. His body burning energy without permission. He layered up, damp base layer biting cold against skin. He swore quietly, then stopped, words feeling like a waste of air. He pulled the bivvy over himself, leaving a gap for breath, the space immediately fogging, moisture freezing along the edge. The headlamp dimmed to save batteries, the darkness pressing close again. Sounds changed at night, the stream louder, the wind sharper, branches ticking as ice shifted. Evan counted breaths, then stopped. When counting became work, he forced himself to eat the rest of the energy bar, chewing slow, jaw stiff, knowing digestion created heat, but also knowing his stomach might reject it. He listened to his own body for warning signs, uncontrollable shivering, confusion, the urge to sleep without preparation. Each one filed mentally, checked against how he felt now. Minutes stretched, then longer, the cold finding gaps he hadn't sealed. His feet the worst, boots stiff, toes dull. He flexed them periodically, small movements inside the bivvy, afraid that if he stopped entirely, restarting would cost more than he had left. He thought about the trail, the white blazes hidden somewhere above him, the shelter that might be empty or full or just out of reach. And for the first time since stepping off the path, fear sharpened into something focused, not panic, but urgency with teeth. Sometime later, impossible to measure without looking, the wind shifted, driving snow against his shelter, the sound like sand. Evan tightened the bivvy opening, breath clouding thicker now, and understood that this night was not something to endure passively. It was an active problem that required attention, awareness, constant adjustment. He stayed awake longer than he wanted to, listening, flexing, thinking, refusing to let the dark make decisions for him. Because out here, losing awareness wasn't rest. It was a handover, and he wasn't ready to give anything up yet. Evan woke to silence so complete it felt artificial, the kind that arrives only after wind exhausts itself. His breath loud inside the bivvy, too loud, each inhale scraping cold air into his chest, each exhale blooming white and wet against the fabric. He didn't know how long he had slept, or if it counted as sleep at all. His muscles stiff, joints aching as if rusted in place, the darkness unchanged, thick and absolute beyond the narrow slit he had left for air. He tested his hands first, fingers slow to respond, clumsy but obedient. Then his feet, toes numb but still there, still answering when he flexed them. The small relief didn't last, because with awareness came cold. Sharper now, more insistent, the kind that didn't just sit on skin but pushed inward. He checked the headlamp, battery weak but alive. The pale circle revealing frost stitched along the bivvy opening, evidence of heat lost and moisture trapped. A quiet record of the night negotiating against him. Outside, the forest had reset, snow smooth again, his tracks erased, the slope above him unreadable in the dim light. Evan sat up carefully, the motion stealing breath, dizziness flaring and then fading. If he paused long enough, he forced himself to drink, water painfully cold, swallowing an act of will. He packed slowly, methodically, knowing haste now would cost more later, gloves on before touching metal, pack sealed tight, every small habit suddenly critical. He stood, waited for his head to clear, then moved uphill. Not because he was confident, but because staying put was no longer neutral. The cold had teeth this morning, and movement was the only way to dull them. The climb burned his legs, breath ragged, sweat threatening again. He vented layers despite the temperature, remembering that wet meant failure later. The headlamp went off as the sky lightened from black to deep blue, a weak promise of day. The stream guided him for a while, then split, then vanished under ice, the landscape offering fewer answers the higher he climbed. Evan stopped often, scanning for blazes, for cut logs, for anything made by hands instead of weather. Twice he thought he saw paint on bark, only to realize it was lichen. His eyes tired now, easily fooled, he slowed further, forced himself to verify before believing, knowing that certainty built on hope was dangerous. Mid-morning light arrived thin and flat, revealing ridges layered like paper cutouts, all of them unfamiliar. Evan reached a small saddle where wind scoured snow down to crust, and there, finally, was something real. A footprint, half-filled, old enough to be softened but not erased. His pulse jumped, then steadied as he found another, then another. A faint line angling toward a stand of hardwoods, not proof of safety, but proof of people, and that mattered more than direction. He followed cautiously, matching stride, conserving energy, the trail reappearing in fragments. A blaze here, a cut branch there, never enough to relax, always enough to keep him moving. Hunger sharpened. He ate sparingly, listening for his body's response, checking for signs of confusion, for the creeping warmth that meant danger. The day stayed cold, honest, at least in that way. By afternoon, clouds gathered again, low and fast, the wind returning with intent. Evan reached a junction he didn't recognize, signs half buried, distances unreliable. He stopped, forced calm, reviewed options. Staying meant another night like the last. Moving meant committing without certainty. He chose movement because stasis had already proven its cost. As snow began again, light but steady, Evan tightened his straps and stepped forward, aware that the margin was still thin, thinner than he liked, but no longer invisible. Each step measured, each breath counted, the mountain watching without interest as he passed through it, still unnoticed but not yet finished. The wind hit him first, hard enough to force a stop, Evan leaning into it with his shoulder like it was something solid, something that could be pushed back. The ridgeline exposed now, trees thinning, snow scoured down to ice in places, each step requiring attention, the kind that drained energy just as surely as climbing. His breath came fast and shallow, not from panic, but from effort, and he had to pause more often than he wanted to admit, counting heartbeats until the dizziness eased. Up here, the trail became an argument. Blazes spaced farther apart, sometimes hidden behind drift or rime, sometimes visible only from the right angle. Evan missed one and walked 50 yards before realizing the ground no longer felt right, too uneven, too quiet. He turned back immediately, correcting without frustration, knowing that anger wasted heat. The cold was steady now, no longer shocking, just persistent, the kind that made long-term promises. He found the next blaze on a rock face dusted with snow, the white paint almost lost against it, and felt a flicker of relief he didn't trust. Relief led to shortcuts. Shortcuts led to mistakes. He kept his pace deliberate, adjusted layers again, venting heat even as his fingers protested. Sweat had no place in this equation. He had learned that lesson the hard way already. By early afternoon, the sky lowered, clouds thickening until the ridge felt pressed from above, the light dimming without warning. Evan checked his watch, recalculated distance, did the math twice to be sure. The numbers came out tight, not impossible, but close enough to demand discipline. He ate a handful of trail mix, chewed until his jaw ached, washed it down with a sip of water he knew he should be saving. But dehydration crept quietly, stealing clarity before strength. The trail dropped suddenly into a notch between hills, the wind easing just enough to feel noticeable. Evan paused there, using the brake to scan ahead, and that's when he heard it. A sound out of place, metal against metal, faint but real. He froze, listening, heart picking up speed despite his efforts to slow it. The sound came again, irregular, then stopped. Not an animal, not wind, something human, or at least made by hands. He moved toward it carefully, not calling out yet, saving that for when he was sure. The trees thickened, snow deeper, and then he saw it. A section of trail sign, snapped clean, half buried. The post leaning at an angle that suggested force, maybe ice, maybe wind, maybe someone else slipping here earlier. The sound had been the sign creaking as the wind worked it. The disappointment hit harder than he expected. Human traces that didn't lead to humans were almost worse than none at all. The clouds finally opened, snow starting again. Light but steady, visibility shrinking. Evan faced another calculation: push on and risk getting caught higher, or drop down and accept whatever shelter the terrain offered. He chose to descend, following the trail as it curved into denser forest, the temperature rising just enough to make the snow heavier, boots clogging, steps costing more. Late afternoon blurred toward evening, and with it came fatigue that settled deep, not just in muscles but in decision-making. Evan caught himself staring too long at nothing, had to shake his head to refocus. He forced a stop, drank, ate, reset his layers, treated the pause like maintenance instead of rest, because rest was dangerous here. As the light thinned again, he spotted a shelter sign, partially buried, arrow pointing off trail, distance unreadable under ice. Evan followed it anyway, counting steps, tracking direction. And when the trees finally opened to reveal the low shape of a lean-to, dark and solid against the snow, the relief that came was sharp and immediate, but short-lived, because as he stepped closer, he saw footprints leading in, and none leading out, fresh enough to matter. And for the first time since he'd been alone, the night ahead became complicated in a way the cold never was. Evan stopped 10 steps short of the shelter, letting his pack settle against his spine, breath fogging the air in short bursts as he studied the footprints. They came in from the trail, staggered, uneven, one boot dragging slightly, the other pressing deeper, as if whoever made them had been tired or injured. The prints disappeared into the dark mouth of the lean-to. No clear sign of departure, no second set circling away. Just entry, then nothing. The kind of detail that refused to explain itself. He didn't call out right away. Sound felt expensive now, something that could bring relief or trouble. He shifted his weight, listening, the wind threading through trees behind him. The shelter quiet. Too quiet for a place that should have held breath, movement, a cough, anything. Evan tightened his grip on the trekking pole, stepped closer, and spoke, his voice low but steady. "Hello." The word hung briefly, then fell flat, unanswered. Inside, the shelter smelled of old wood and cold ash. The floor packed dirt, swept clean by wind. A single sleeping pad lay against the back wall, thin, creased, abandoned without ceremony. Beside it, a crushed plastic bottle, empty, its cap missing. Evan scanned the corners, eyes adjusting. No body, no pack. No obvious sign of panic, just absence, which somehow felt heavier than evidence. He backed out slowly, relief and unease mixing into something sharp. Someone had been here recently, close enough in time to matter, and that meant two things at once: that the trail still held people, and that survival here did not guarantee comfort. He chose the left side of the shelter, away from the sleeping pad, marked his space without claiming the whole structure, an old habit from shared camps, respect born of uncertainty. As darkness settled in fully, Evan worked quickly but carefully, stamping down snow outside for a windbreak, melting a small amount for water, the stove sputtering before catching, the flame fragile and precious. He ate more than he planned, hunger louder now, the food grounding him, giving his body something to process besides cold. He kept listening, pausing between motions, aware that the woods carried sound farther at night. Later, wrapped in his bivvy inside the shelter, the temperature dropping fast, Evan noticed how the cold felt different here, less aggressive but more patient, creeping rather than striking. He flexed his toes, checked his hands, cataloged sensations, anything to stay engaged. Sleep pressed at the edges of his thoughts, heavy and inviting. He fought it in short intervals, setting mental alarms, waking himself to move, to breathe deeper, to confirm he was still present. Sometime after midnight, a noise cut through the routine, soft but distinct, snow compressing under weight, not wind, not branch. Evan froze, listening, heart rate spiking despite the cold. The sound came again, closer now, then stopped. He held his breath. Every sense narrowed, the shelter suddenly feeling very small. He waited, seconds stretching, muscles tense, ready to speak or stay silent depending on what came next. A figure emerged at the edge of the headlamp's dim spill, hands raised, movements slow. A man, older, face drawn, eyes reflecting light like an animal caught between fear and calculation. He spoke first, voice rough. "Didn't think anyone else would be up here tonight," Evan answered carefully, keeping his tone even. And in that brief exchange, standing in the cold with nothing but shared circumstance between them, Evan understood that survival had shifted again. No longer just about weather and terrain, but about trust, boundaries, and how much help two strangers could afford to give each other without putting themselves at risk. They kept distance by instinct, Evan staying where he was, the older man remaining just inside the shelter's edge, both of them measuring tone and posture the way you measured weather, looking for shifts that mattered. The man introduced himself as Tom, not offering a last name, his voice steady but tired, the kind of tired that lived deeper than muscles. He said he'd come in an hour earlier, left again when the wind picked up, panicked about freezing in one place, then turned back when the trail vanished under fresh snow. His story came out uneven, stopping and starting, like someone checking their own memory as they spoke. Evan nodded, not agreeing, just acknowledging. He asked simple questions: where Tom had started, which direction he thought he was heading, how long his food would last. Tom answered most of them, avoided one, his eyes flicking toward the dark beyond the shelter as if the forest might contradict him. Evan filed that away without comment. Out here, gaps in a story didn't always mean lies. Sometimes they meant fear arranged itself differently in different people. They settled into a cautious routine, sharing heat without sharing space. Evan melted snow again, offered water. Tom accepted it with a nod that carried more gratitude than words. The stove hissed softly, a fragile sound of control, the night pressing close around them. Tom's hands shook as he drank, not violently, but enough to notice. Evan watched for signs. Hypothermia didn't announce itself. It suggested quietly, through clumsiness and misplaced confidence. Sleep came in fragments, never at the same time, one always awake while the other drifted, an unspoken agreement forming without discussion. Evan woke once to Tom sitting upright, staring into the dark, breathing fast. Evan spoke his name once, softly, the sound grounding both of them. Tom nodded, lay back down. The moment passed, but it left a residue. Awareness sharpened. rest becoming a task instead of a relief. Before dawn, the temperature dropped again, cold finding its way through wood and fabric. Evan flexed his toes, checked circulation, noticed Tom doing the same, mirroring movements without comment. The first hint of light arrived slowly, gray bleeding into black, the forest reappearing in pieces, branches first, then trunks, then distance. Both men packed with deliberate care, knowing morning brought options but also exposure. Outside, the storm had softened the world. Edges rounded, sound muted. Tom pointed out a set of tracks heading downhill, fresher than the ones Evan had followed. They stood over them, calculating downhill meant warmth, water, maybe a road, but also distance from the trail. From known markers, uphill meant effort and wind, but also blazes and structure. Neither choice clean. They talked it through without rushing, voices low, each man protecting his own margin. Evan felt the weight of responsibility shift, not disappear, but redistribute. Decisions now negotiated, compromise replacing instinct. In the end, they chose the ridge, the trail, uncertainty with rules instead of comfort with risk. They adjusted packs, checked each other's straps without asking, and stepped out together, not trusting fully, but trusting enough. The mountain watching as it always had, indifferent to partnership, but ready to test it. They climbed into the wind as if stepping into a moving wall, the ridge narrowing until balance demanded constant attention. Evan leading it first, counting steps between breaths, then slowing as his calves began to burn in a way that warned of failure later. Tom moved ahead without discussion, setting a pace that was steady rather than strong, the kind meant to last. The trail revealing itself only in pieces, a white blaze half swallowed by frost, a sawed log rimmed with ice, signs that existed just long enough to be confirmed before disappearing again. Fog slid in around them, not dramatic, just persistent, reducing the world to a few yards of gray. Sound flattening, depth collapsing. Evan found himself focusing on Tom's boots, matching his rhythm to conserve effort. The danger now less about sudden mistakes and more about gradual erosion. The slow loss of attention that came when movement became repetitive and thinking felt expensive. They missed a turn without realizing it. The trail bending away while they continued straight, the error revealing itself only when the ground changed texture, steeper, looser, wrong. Evan stopped immediately, raised a hand. Tom halted a step later, both listening. The mountain quiet, except for wind threading through branches below. Evan backtracked carefully, scanning, and found the blaze they'd passed. Thin paint nearly erased by rime. They corrected without comment, without blame, the kind of adjustment that came from shared exhaustion and mutual awareness. By late morning, hunger arrived with precision, not as pain, but as irritability. Evan caught himself rushing a step, forcing himself to stop, eat slowly, chew until his jaw ached. Tom did the same, the simple act restoring clarity inch by inch. They spoke little, words trimmed to function, slope warnings, distance guesses, brief confirmations that the other was still steady on their feet. Dropping into a shallow saddle eased the wind, and with it came a sound that didn't belong, faint, mechanical, a low hum that rose and fell. Evan froze. Tom did too. They stood listening, heads tilted. The sound returned, then vanished, then came back again, not imagined, but not reliable either. The possibility of a road or machinery hit hard, hope sharp and dangerous. They didn't chase it, just noted the direction, stored it for later. The climb resumed, steeper now, snow crust breaking underfoot. Tom slipped once, caught himself, let out a short laugh that sounded strange in the quiet. Evan didn't answer. Humor felt like something for later, when safety was less conditional. They kept moving, poles biting ice, boots testing each step before committing weight. Mid-afternoon light thinned as clouds lowered again, temperature dropping with it. Evan checked time, did the math twice. Reaching shelter or a road before dark was possible but narrow, the margin shrinking again. They pushed slightly harder, careful not to sweat, discipline overriding impulse. Then the fog tore open for a moment, revealing a straight line cut through the forest below. Unnatural, pale against dark trees. Evan stopped, stared. Tom followed his gaze. A road, snow-covered but wide. Faint tire tracks pressed into it, proof of recent movement. Relief spread slowly, loosening something tight in Evan's chest without rushing judgment. The descent was careful, legs tired, slope slick, each step controlled, and when they reached the road, they paused again, neither stepping out immediately, the decision not finished yet. Roads meant help, but also exposure and unknown direction. Evan looked at Tom. Tom nodded once, agreement without words. They turned left together, following the tracks, choosing movement over doubt, the mountain fading behind them, not conquered, just left for now. The road felt wider than the trail, but no safer. Snow packed hard by old tires, edges dropping into dark brush, wind running straight down it without trees to break its force. Evan felt the cold immediately. Sharper now without the shelter of the forest. Movement easier but heat harder to keep. They walked single file, heads down, eyes scanning for reflectors, signs, anything that confirmed this line led somewhere and not nowhere. The tire tracks faded in places, reappeared in others, telling an inconsistent story. A vehicle had passed recently enough to matter, but not recently enough to trust. Evan counted steps again, a habit returning when uncertainty rose. Tom's pace slowed slightly, not dramatic, just enough to notice. Evan adjusted without comment, shortening his stride, matching rhythm, conserving energy they could not replace. They passed a bend where the wind funneled hard, forcing a stop. Evan turned his back to it, letting his pack take the brunt. Tom leaned beside him, breathing loud, controlled, both men aware that this was the kind of exposure that drained strength invisibly. No drama, just steady loss. They moved on as soon as breath allowed. Dusk came early, clouds thickening until the sky and ground blurred into the same dull color. Evan reached for his headlamp again, hesitated, then clicked it on. Saving eye strain mattered now. The beam caught ice glittering on the road, deer tracks crossing and vanishing into brush, signs of life that offered no help. They talked briefly, exchanging information instead of reassurance. How far Evan thought the road might run. What Tom remembered from his map. Neither certain, but both clearer for having said it out loud. Sound-anchored thought, kept fear from filling gaps. A mile in, maybe less, maybe more. The road dipped, and with it came a smell, faint but unmistakable, wood smoke. Evan stopped so fast Tom nearly ran into him. They stood there, breathing, listening. The smell returned with the wind, then faded, then came back again. Real, not imagined. Both of them turning slowly until the direction settled. They followed it carefully, afraid to rush and lose it. The road curving, trees thinning, and then, far ahead, a light, small, steady, yellow against the gray. Evan felt his throat tighten, relief sharp enough to hurt, but he didn't speed up. Neither did Tom, both men knowing too many stories ended badly at the last 100 yards. As they approached, the light resolved into a cabin set back from the road, snow piled high against its walls, smoke curling weakly from a chimney. Evan raised a hand, waved, then knocked when they reached the door. The sound loud in the quiet, seconds stretched, then footsteps. The door opening to reveal a woman wrapped in wool, eyes narrowing, assessing. They spoke at once, then stopped. Evan explaining simply, lost hikers, cold, needing help. The woman listened, then stepped aside without hesitation. Warmth spilling out, the smell of coffee and wood. The door closing behind them with a sound that felt final in the best possible way. Evan standing there for a moment longer than necessary, letting heat sink in, understanding that survival did not always end with triumph. Sometimes it ended with someone else opening a door at the exact moment you ran out of options. Warmth didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, first as pain in Evan's fingers, then as a deep ache in his feet, the kind that warned against rushing anything. The woman closed the door and slid the bolt without drama, the sound oddly reassuring. She introduced herself as Claire, spoke plainly, asked them to sit, not offering explanations yet, just structure, the stove ticking softly as it worked, heat radiating in uneven waves that made Evan feel dizzy if he leaned too close. Tom lowered himself onto a chair like it might vanish if he trusted it too much. Evan stayed standing for a moment longer, aware that sudden rest could be dangerous. Claire watched them with the practiced eye of someone who had seen cold before. She handed over mugs of water, not coffee, not yet. Told them to sip, not drink. Evan obeyed without question, the water lukewarm, grounding, his hands shaking enough that some spilled onto the floor. As sensation returned, so did awareness. Evan noticed the room, maps pinned to the wall, snowshoes by the door, a radio on the shelf, silent but ready. Signs that this place was prepared for isolation. Claire asked where they'd come from, how long they'd been out, her questions efficient, not curious, Evan answered. Tom filled gaps, their stories overlapping just enough to sound real. Claire nodded, absorbing, then moved to the stove, adding wood with measured care. Time stretched differently indoors. Minutes felt heavier, fuller. Evan fought the pull of sleep, blinking hard, flexing his toes inside boots he hadn't yet removed, Claire noticed, told him to wait, to let heat work gradually. Hypothermia didn't end at the door. It lingered, waited for mistakes. The warning settled deep. Evan adjusted, stayed present. Outside, wind picked up again, rattling the walls, snow tapping at the windows, the reminder sharp. They were safe now, but only just. Tom's hands shook more violently as warmth returned. A normal response, Claire said, but she watched him closely, checked speech, eye focus, kept him talking, kept him anchored. Eventually boots came off, steam rising, the smell sharp, human. Evan grimaced, embarrassed. Claire waved it away. Survival wasn't tidy. She brought blankets, thick, rough, real, wrapped them without fuss, like finishing a task already decided. The radio crackled to life. Claire adjusting the dial, voices bleeding through static, weather updates, road closures, the outside world reasserting itself in fragments. Evan listened, understanding how close they'd come to being a report instead of listeners. As night settled fully, Evan felt the tension ease just enough to notice it had been there at all, his body heavy, exhausted beyond words. But his mind stayed sharp, replaying choices, steps, moments where things could have tipped the other way. He looked at Tom, who met his gaze and nodded once, a shared acknowledgement, not celebration, just recognition. They had crossed the line where survival became aftermath, not relief, but accounting, and Evan knew the story wasn't finished yet, because surviving the mountain was one thing, carrying it back into the world was another, and that part, the quiet part, was just beginning. Morning came quietly, a flat gray light seeping through the cabin windows, showing snow piled higher than the night before. Evan woke alert but still, the kind of stillness that followed danger rather than preceded it. His body heavy, sore in a way that felt stable, the stove warm, the air inside calm. Claire already moving, efficient, unhurried, coffee finally brewing, its smell anchoring him more than the heat. Tom sat at the table wrapped in a blanket, hands steadier now, eyes clear enough to hold focus. They exchanged a look that carried relief without celebration, just confirmation. Claire explained where they were, how the storm had closed roads overnight, how help would come later, not immediately. Survival stretching forward a few more hours, reshaped but not finished. Evan stepped outside briefly, careful on stiff legs, the cold sharp but manageable, the road they had followed barely visible now, softened by new snow, erasing their tracks as if they had never been there. the ridges beyond calm and distant, unchanged by what had passed through them. He stood there longer than necessary, letting the scale reset inside him. Inside again, plans formed simply. Radio checks, waiting, conserving movement. Evan listened, nodded, feeling responsibility loosen its grip, not gone, but shared. His hands around a mug now, heat no longer something to earn, his mind replaying moments without urgency. The mist blaze, the shelter, the road appearing through fog, all of it lining up behind him, fixed. When the radio finally confirmed a truck would reach them by afternoon, no one reacted much. The news settled quietly, like something expected rather than won. Evan noticed that, how survival rarely ended with noise, more often with routine returning piece by piece. As the engine sound finally reached the cabin, distant but real, Evan stood, ready without rushing, stepping outside as the truck emerged through falling snow. The moment simple, unremarkable. He looked once more toward the ridgeline, then turned away, carrying the understanding that survival was never about defeating the mountain, only about moving through it with enough attention to know when to stop before it decided for you. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to read more survival stories.